Hello everyone, welcome to Keen Ear. So for this video we're going to be stepping away from the world of music and instead focusing on the world of literature, because earlier this year, back in April to be precise, which was like an eternity ago at this point in time, it does for me anyway, but I managed to get my first book published. And I want to give at the very least some credit to James Griffiths, who about a year ago at this point in time, there or thereabouts anyway, he uploaded a video here on YouTube in which he talked about his experiences of getting his book published. And I have a copy of it here. It's a book that he wrote on the group Squeeze. And that video was a revelation for more than a few reasons really. The fact that he wrote a book and I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't aware that he had was writing one or had written one or anything like that. So yeah, I was very much intrigued to see what he'd come up with, and I was interested to hear the process that he went through of writing his book and doing the research and all that kind of thing. But the big revelation for me personally was the method in which he used to get the book published, which was a method which I was completely unaware of at the time. And it was like that big, sort of eureka moment, I suppose. And what happened is I had a manuscript for a book that had been lying around for a long time. I'd started writing my book. It wasn't during lockdown or anything like that. It was way, way before, even the very first lockdown. I think I started it roughly around about nearly close to a decade ago, when I first started really. And it took quite a while to write. I just sort of wrote it as a hobby, it was just a side project really, and that sort of thing. And one of the things about first time writers, I had written things in the past, never a novel or anything like that, but I'd written other things, short stories and scripts and that kind of thing, but I'd never taken on a novel before. And one of the things apparently about them is that most people who start them never finish them. They kind of realize how tricky it is to write a novel, and how much work it takes and how much time it takes to do it, and they kind of give up. They wave the white flag and give up. But I guess I had at least some persistence, more than anything else, I suppose. And I finished it. I completed it. Well, pretty much complete anyway. It was like 95% complete. I was pretty much happy with it. More or less all we're all ready to go. But next came the difficult part, I suppose, which is to try and get it published. And for those who aren't aware, trying to get a book published, particularly if you've never written anything before, you've got no real reputation or anything like that, through the traditional methods anyway, is incredibly difficult. And the traditional method is you track the attention of a literary agent, and the literary agent would then sign you up, and then they try and get you into the publishing world. They contact publishers and all that kind of thing. They take over distribution and work deals out and that kind of thing, similar to being, I guess, a musician and that kind of thing. And I contacted pretty much every literary agent I could. I went even to, even contacted American ones, and I think I contacted a few Australian ones and I went everywhere I could possibly, could to contact. And yeah, pretty much all of them did. Yeah, they all turned me down. Most of them didn't call me back or anything like that. I had no response from them. A few of them did, and a few of them, kind of gave you a little bit of hope that you can kind of maybe do it. But in the end, I kind of had to give up. It was kind of, and it was, of course, it was disappointing. You get knocked back like that. But I was kind of expecting it because I knew it was going to be very difficult. And I kind of had to have a reality check, I suppose, and that sort of thing. So yeah, it got shelved. My novel got shelved, and it was hanging around, sort of for quite a while, just not really doing anything. And I kind of, more than anything else, I just wanted it like a physical book copy of it, and I didn't want, I was very worried about losing, all the work I'd put into it and all the time I'd put into it, if the save file corrupted or whatever. And I did have backups and that kind of thing, but even so, it was kind of a worry to kind of I would kind of lose it really, and all that hard work would be down the drain. So anyway, when I saw James's video, I thought I could do that as well. I've got it lying around, so I went to work rewriting it through the winter. Last winter. Kind of clearing it up, and that took quite a long time actually, because it was not as complete as I originally thought it was. So yeah, it was kind of almost a complete rewrite all the way through, and I kind of then went through it again, and yeah, in the end, I got pretty much was satisfied with it, as satisfied as I've probably ever likely to be, the way that it was. So yeah, I submitted it to Amazon, and it got. It got through all the process. I'm not sure how much sort of a process they have or anything like that. They have any sort of quality control or anything like that. I'm not too sure, but it went through and it got accepted. And yeah, it came about, and I have a copy of it here. This is the very first copy, I believe, that was ever created of the book, and one of the things that was going around at the time, I was trying to, because this whole publishing thing was sort of, I never really got to that point. It stopped at the point of writing it really, writing the book. So when it came to the publishing side, it was all kind of new to me. Covers and all that. That was all something that I'd have liked to have got to at that, years and years ago, but I never got to it. And finally, I had to put some attention onto that, and I kind of heard that one of the things you need to do is get a professional photographer or a graphic designer and all that kind of thing. And I did listen to a lot of the advice, but I didn't really pay any attention to it. So instead of doing that, I just did my own thing. I went out to the park and I took this photograph, and I sort of used a sort of very basic design on it and that kind of thing. A sort of one size fits all sort of design on it, but I'm quite pleased with the way that it turned out. I took this back in probably around March, and I wanted to make sure I got it before the leaves grew on the trees. You can see the trees there, because the book is actually set in the autumn time, mostly set in the autumn time anyway. And I didn't want all the leaves on the tree, so this was just before the trees started to leaf. Well, anyway, so yeah, I ignored all the advice about getting it professionally done and all that, and just did it myself. I even took the photograph on my sort of budget phone, so it's not even a particularly high resolution. But one of the things I'm amazed about in regards to the cover is there's no litter. I'm kind of I thought I'd get to this because I had in mind what I was going to do. And I went down to the park and I thought I'm going to be clearing litter away, because the book it's set in like the 19th century, so I couldn't have like a Pepsi can or anything like that. But absolutely amazingly, I didn't have to move one tiny piece of litter at all from the shop. But anyway, so yeah, I got it here, and it was kind of a nice thing really to kind of and I kind of do really want to thank James for just kind of bringing my attention to it really, because this wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for James. I'd have probably still had my head in the sand over the situation, and it was kind of a nice thing to kind of go back to because it was kind of abandoned on the shelf for many years actually, and to kind of go back to it and re-experience it. And it's nice to read it in an actual book as well. It's so different to reading it on a computer screen. It really is. I never really got into electronic readers or anything like that. So actually have I'd much rather read a book, an actual physical book, than anything like that. So yeah, I got it put together, and I'm very pleased with it overall. Now, in terms of inspiration I got for writing it, mostly it stems mostly from Edgar Allan Poe. I suppose he is probably my favourite author. I was reading this recently. It's a bit beaten up because I actually took it to a Roxy Music gig of all places, but this is Edgar Allan Poe's poems effectively, and I got this a few years ago from Waterstones, I think, and yeah, they're pretty good. His poems are very good, but I've got this one as well, which is Tales and that sort of thing, and it's an old book that I found somewhere, and yeah, his short stories are very good, and the biggest, I suppose, form of inspiration comes from an Edgar Allan Poe story called, and this is another one of Poe's books. This is The Gold Bug, which is it's the closest thing that Edgar Allan Poe ever got to writing a novel. It's more like a novella, I suppose, very pretty short novel, and there's definitely some references and ideas kind of lifted, I suppose, if you want to call it that. And there's definitely some inspiration from that. Also, as well, Dracula. It's not about vampires or anything like that. So don't think that. But there's ideas and there's methods that are sort of kind of copied a bit from this, I suppose, because anybody who's ever read Dracula will know whether it's sort of written in a sort of very it's written as a bunch of memoirs and diary notes and letters and that kind of thing. I thought that was kind of very interesting, and I've taken elements of that. It's not written in the same style. I've taken elements of that, which sort of inspired from Frankenstein, also Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is the 1818 text, and again, the story's not about a man who creates a monster from bits of dead body parts or anything like that. But there's ideas and things like that which I've taken from this, and I haven't actually read these since I started writing the book. Actually, I could do with rereading them. But this is another inspiration. This is Dickens' Great Expectations, probably my favourite novel of all time. It's a great one. I do like A Tale of Two Cities very much as well, and there's parts of Little Dorrit as well that I like, and there's definitely a character who takes some more than a little bit of inspiration from Little Dorrit. But yeah, I do really like Dickens as well. I've read pretty much everything he wrote. Really, I've read more than I haven't. I think there's only like a couple of books I haven't read from Dickens, and I was reading this as well at the time. This is Swiss Family Robinson. There's an element of that. So yeah, it's kind of Frankenstein, Great Expectations, Swiss Family Robinson. So yeah, it's all kind of mixed together, really. So they're the inspirations now, and and I'm not expecting anyone to go on Amazon to buy the book. I just wanted to make a video and talk about it, really, and thank James. I'm not expecting anyone to pick up a copy, but it is coming up to Christmas, and it would make a really fantastic Christmas gift. No, but in all honesty, in all sincerity, it was just this video is just to mark the fact that I've finally got this thing published. And if I was really into kind of pushing this thing, the book was it was on Amazon and back in April. It's now November, so it kind of shows how kind of a bit lax I am about pushing this thing. And it's just something, if you want to check out, if you're interested, by all means check her out. But if you're not really that interested or anything like that, don't feel compelled or whatever to buy a copy. Now, I'll talk about the plot a little bit. If you are interested, I'll talk a little bit about what the book's essentially about. And in terms of its plot, it centres around an industrialist who is called Legrand, and the name Legrand, by the way, is taken from Edgar Allan Poe's The Gold Bug. So that's where that comes from. And Legrand he's a 19th century industrialist who's done pretty well for himself, self-made millionaire, which was very common, well, quite common at the time. People who came from fairly humble backgrounds, new money effectively of the 19th century. He owns a factory, and he's got members of his family working, so it's a family business, and he's done quite well for himself. But he sort of reaches his retirement age, and due to his wife's ill health, ever increasing ill health, it's decided that they basically go off and retire in the countryside, and just spend the rest of the days in the countryside, and that kind of thing, living relative luxury and that, just in peace and that kind of thing. So they buy a bit of land and they build a house on it. And they move over, somewhat reluctant. Legrand doesn't really want to go. He's very much a go-getter. He likes working. He's an industrialist guy. Anyway, for the sake of his wife, he goes out to the countryside with it. Retires effectively. Anyway, not too long after they they live in this house, his wife dies, and this isn't a spoiler or anything like that. This is very much the backdrop of the plot. Well, anyway, his wife dies, and he's kind of stuck then with really what to do. He doesn't know whether to stay in the countryside and just kind of get on with the path that path, or come back to the city and carry on working again, and get back into it, because he's sort of lost the reason to be in that house and that sort of thing. And he just kind of wants, he's sort of very much distracted by the situation he's found himself in, and a bit annoyed by the situation he's found himself in, depressed by it, and he kind of just wants a distraction. He takes on all these hobbies and that kind of thing, but nothing really makes him happy. So eventually he decides to come back into work again, and he becomes the head of the company again, and he's taken on all the responsibility which was given to his son, but is now claimed back again. And then things start to go a bit bad for the company. He's a bit out of touch. He's a bit too old. His personality's changed since the death of his wife. He's become a bit difficult. He's become a bit, hard to be around and that kind of thing. And he's just become a bit of a nuisance, I suppose. But nobody can really do anything because he owns the company and he's the big boss and that kind of thing. And he starts to get stranger and stranger, and eventually the company starts to lose more and more money, and it starts to get pretty bad. It's hemorrhaging money and that kind of thing. And eventually it gets to the point where it's looking pretty grim for the company, but there's nothing really anyone can do because he's in control and that sort of thing. And eventually he moves back into the countryside for a little bit. He just spends a bit of time there, and then he goes missing. He completely disappears. Nobody knows where he is. Nobody has any sort of idea where he is. So while he's missing, the company then goes back to his son. He takes over again, and then he realizes the financial situation that the company is in, and it's pretty much on its knees and it's going to go bankrupt. So he's basically trying to save the company from going under, but at the same time he's got his dad who's missing in the countryside, so he doesn't really, he's in a real predicament. So he sends his cousin, his younger cousin, out to the countryside to go and look for him effectively. And that's kind of where the meat of the story is. The focus of the story isn't on Legrand, it's on Jonathan, a character called Jonathan. I took the name Jonathan from inspiration from Dracula, Jonathan Harker, the main character, I guess, of the book. And Jonathan's kind of out out of his depth, really. He's a city guy. He's he's an office guy. He's got he's got a pretty charmed life. He's got a fairly soft life. He doesn't really he's kind of not in great shape. So he's very much out of it, and hence the the term layman's trail. He is the layman of the story, and he's out looking in the countryside for his great uncle, and his great uncle is a guy he doesn't really know. He doesn't really know that much about him. He doesn't really know much about the area in which he's got to search. And yeah, it's got all that kind of stuff. So he's kind of out of his depth, and that's kind of the basis of the story, really. I kind of won't really go into any more detail because basically you'd be giving everything else away. But yeah, there's still quite a lot more that needs talking about. And he kind of learns more about his family and more about what was going on as it progresses, and of course the audience kind of learns along with him, really. And yeah, that's kind of the basis of the there's all kind of craziness goes on, and there's kind of it's kind of an adventure story with mystery, strong mystery elements, with horror, and but bits of comedy as well. I tried to keep it quite comedic at places, and yeah, it's a real mix of all kinds of bits and pieces, really. And I got some one of the things about it's very much inspired by 19th century literature. I've gone through a whole heap of them, and one of the things about particularly Edgar Allan Poe, I've noticed, is he has some things which you can't really explain better than saying they're pretty much fairly stupid ideas that he has. There's one of his stories which is a murder mystery, and not to spoil it or anything like that, but the murderer, it turns out to be, is an escaped orangutan, I believe, and it's going around killing women, breaking into houses and murdering women and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's kind of I took an element of that as well. Not there's an orangutan going around murdering people, but if only. But it's kind of got that sort of idea to it. And one of the things that I was very much interested in when it comes to storytelling, really, it's not just this book, but just generally storytelling. The first thing is I like to focus on an everyman when I'm writing. It's basically somebody who the audience can relate to, and that's who Jonathan very much is. He's very much an average guy of the time. Nothing really that remarkable about him, and he's the basis. And also as well, I set it in the 19th century, but I didn't specify a date or a location. And that's one of the things as well. That's like a top tip I can give. Not that I'm an authority on this type of thing, but it's a top tip that I can give is just make a universe for yourself whenever you're writing something, whether it be a novel or a script or whatever it is you're writing, a short story. Try to create your own universe. For instance, if you're very interested in, say, the 1970s, don't think, okay, I really love the 70s. I'm going to set it in, say, 1973, and I'm going to set it in London, and then type away and think everything's going to be all great. Because I tell you what, by the time you finish writing, you're going to have a reference to something that didn't come out until 1976, so that's wrong. Or you got another reference that didn't happen until 1979 or whatever, or something else that happens which would very unlikely happen at that date, in London. So you're sort of restricting yourself unnecessarily. Another thing as well that I really found, and I'll just kind of leave it on this really, but this is one of the things that I really find fascinating about storytelling, which is really the thing that really pushed me to write the book and to kind of put all the effort into creating it. Really was something that I really do truly find fascinating, which is a character in a story who's integral, who's very important to everything. If you take this character away, the whole story sort of falls in on itself. You kind of it's like the foundations of a building. You take the foundations away, everything just crumbles. But the character who's so integral, so important, doesn't actually feature really all that much. And Legrand, who have talked about, the old industrialist of this story, he doesn't actually say anything in the entire novel, really. He's kind of, he's very much in the background of everything. I talked quite a lot about him in the plot, the synopsis and that kind of thing. But he's very much in the background. He's like the shadowy figure. And that's the thing that I kind of find kind of really interesting. This sort of integral character who doesn't really interact with the story, has no real, he's not in every scene or anything like it. It's very different to Dracula, by the way. Dracula, he never shuts up in this book. He's always constantly talking away. Similar to me in this video, really. He's always talking away. So yeah, I think I've talked enough really about my book. Layman's Trail by Adam Peters. Is that my name or is it a pseudonym? Very mysterious indeed. But yeah, if you want to check her out, it's on Amazon. If you're not interested, if what I've just talked about doesn't interest you at all, and you've made it to this over 20-minute point, and you're still not interested, you don't need to check her out. But if you are interested, check her out if you want. Make a great gift for Christmas and that kind of thing. And that's all, all that kind of deal. And you'd be able to check out this little mysterious little book and learn about the ordeal that my characters go through, because it is quite an ordeal that they go through. It really is. And I'll read the back, and then we'll kind of end here on that. Okay, so tracing the pursuit and ultimately suffering the consequences of Legrand Fordham's absence, a blood relative, Jonathan Fordham, enters into a challenge that even he himself cannot foresee overcoming, an endeavour to unearth the truth and locate his lost uncle. Regardless of being without capable means or knowledge, Jonathan is joined by the self-important Walpole to perform his duty by any means and at any cost. From newly unearthed and weak past memories, the story unfolds in the bleakness of a stormy, isolated countryside, set deep in a world where science and the supernatural collide, where hope battles defeat, time constantly runs dry, and the target lies constantly astray somewhere unsettlingly in the darkness. So we'll leave it at that. Thanks very much for watching. And if you buy a copy of my book, thank you very much. See you soon.